Kia ora katoa katoa. My name's Simon Curran. It's my huge privilege to welcome to you to the next edition in our virtual Spark Lab series. This is one I'm particularly excited about. For those of you that haven't participated in Spark Lab before, let me start by just giving you a little bit of context. We designed Spark Lab 8 years ago to provide business leaders, business influencers with practical tools, tips, suggestions, provocations that they could use in their daily lives from tomorrow. And to do that, we scour for the world's best, thought leaders, those that are on the cutting edge of their thinking, at the cutting edge of defining industries. I've completely lost my thought of choice. We've got enough there to cut into something there. It's my great privilege to share the space today with a good friend of mine, Dr Alia Bojilova. Alia is one of the world's truly unique individuals, as you're about to hear. Alia comes from the world of the elite defence force. She served in some of the world's most extreme and tumultuous environments, both as a professional soldier, but also as a civilian. Alia has turned her life to working with organisations, communities and individuals to help them reach their next level of performance. As a performance coach, as a trained psychologist, and as you're going to hear, our conversation today is going to traverse a wide range of topics. In Alia's time with the New Zealand Defence Force, Alia headed up the New Zealand Defence Force Organisational Development Program and was in charge of the Defence Force Leadership Framework, which helped cultivate a new level of leadership, capability and confidence for our soldiers around the world. Today's particular conversation is going to focus on this idea of performing under pressure, and more specifically, at the spinning edge of possibility. So with that in mind, Alia, welcome to today's discussion.
Thank you.
So let me just start. Can I ask you to give the listeners today, give us your view of your version of your history?
My version of a history is one of utmost obsession with curiosity and resilience. And I'm really grateful that this was the case for me, for practical reasons initially. And then it became an obsession intellectually, philosophically, academically, and practically, because it's the one thing, or the two things that we really need to survive and thrive. So whilst the majority of my career so far has been in New Zealand Defence Force, and continues to be there, to some degree, I've loved nothing more than being able to not just absorb the lessons learned we gain from humans who are able to thrive and survive in some of the most acute conditions, but recognize how these same principles translate irrespective of context, background, cross-culturally, cross. So I've loved that. I've loved that ability to play with those critical constructs in a variety of different environments.
Okay, because there will be some listening thinking, okay, so why do we have someone that served with New Zealand's elite defence force talking to us today about practical tools and tips that they can take in their day jobs tomorrow? And part of the reason for that is we know this idea of uncertainty is something that has become part of our daily reality, perhaps for some more than others.
Yeah.
But specifically what we're trying to do today is to look at lessons from extreme environments so we can bring them back into the day-to-day realities of our worlds today. And Alia has built a very practical model to help us navigate this discussion. Now this model starts with a word we're all very familiar with, or we've heard a lot about, but I'm not sure we all really understand what it means. And that's the word resilience. So could you start perhaps, Alia, give us your definition of what you mean by the term resilience.
I want to double click on why would we listen? Why would we listen from people who are selecting themselves to operate in environments of ambiguity first, such as, for example, the New Zealand Special Air Service or Special Forces? And why would we be following in the footsteps of elite performers across a variety of different fields? And the reason for it is that, by and large, these are individuals who are selected and trained for operating in ambiguity, the kinds of which most of us felt we haven't experienced until COVID came to us. And so there is a lot to be gained from this. There's no point us trying to rehash or rewrite a playbook that has existed in some instances for hundreds of years. The job to be done now is to extract that and to understand what do these things really mean. But to your second question there, resilience is a term that I've had difficult relationship with over time. And big part of the reason why is that I think we have always defined it in really clumsy ways. So let me just call out the definition that has haunted me for decades. Bouncing back following an untoward event.
Right.
Untoward according to whom? against what criteria? The thing that bothers me about this definition that most of us have in our minds and are looking to define resilience by is that this untoward thing, critical incident, acute event, we are all wired innately to deal with it. The challenge for most of us, including individuals who operate in the extreme, is how do we manage the daily grind, the little pebble in your shoe, the thing that eats away at you. Okay. That's the first point. The second point is that bouncing back thing that we have to redefine. Most of us have understood through our COVID experience that it's very difficult to bounce back to something that is no longer there. And most of us have grappled with trying to recover, recreate, rebuild things that are no longer effective. Now, in teams like the SAS, for example, that I spent so much of my life studying and working along with, bouncing back is not good enough. It's bouncing forward always, better than a minute before found you, better than the last exposure found you, be that good, be that bad, be that neutral. So, bouncing forward, yes.
Okay.
Bouncing back, not so much.
So that's an interesting reframe, isn't it? Because sometimes we hear this idea that it's in trauma and crisis you go through your greatest growth.
Absolutely.
Are you saying, however, that it is trauma, or it's just the daily reality of small setback after small setback? Like, what is the actual trigger to drain resilience?
Well, here is the thing. It can be both. And there's the question around recovery there. So trauma, acute incidences, yes, of course, they do have the capacity to deplete us completely. Most of us recover in some form or another after a while, however.
Yes.
The question is, are we fit for the future that presents itself if we allow it?
Okay.
So that's the first part. But the vast majority of us aren't depleted by acute traumas in our lives. Every one of us would have that at some form or another at some stage of our lives.
Yes.
Usually are the sorts of things that take away from our self-efficacy, our confidence in our ability to influence our lives in the way we want to, our ability to impact the reality that we want to be a part of. That's the stuff that takes away from us the most. Okay. That's where resilience gives in.
Really, really interesting. And so from the outset, you've helped us reframe a concept, because for some, resilience, we've had a discussion previously, this idea that resilience is somewhat of a leaky bucket, and that we need to continue to build it. And I love the kind of concept, I need to make myself stronger to carry more load on this journey to bouncing forward. So in your experience, if someone is listening to this today that feels like they need to continue to refill their bucket, practical ways, Alia, to help do that, to build your bucket back up for resilience?
I love that reference of resilience being like a bucket, and I think it belongs to a military psychologist, thank goodness, back in World War II, who decided if you live life long enough and well enough, life will go and make some holes on your bucket. So the content of resilience will be depleted. What you fill that bucket with is very much person specific, right? We all ought to know what fuels us, what sustains us, what's meaningful to us uniquely. No one else is going to give us that recipe. And that's part of the challenge. That's the existential challenge of knowing who is it that is standing there ready to tackle the next step. So we would think that there are a plethora of recommendations, especially in this day and age, around what can help us maintain equilibrium, the basic stuff, physical health, nutrients, that sort of stuff, sleep. But the stuff that fuels us authentically and meaningfully, that's for the individual to define.
Okay, so in that sense, as we start heading into the model ABCD, this idea that we're not talking about how do we buffer ourselves from harm. We're talking about how do we refuel ourselves and re-energize ourselves to continue to go in the face of small or acute events.
That's right.
Okay.
And I like that. Can I just double click there too? I like how you said it's not about buffering yourself from stuff. What we have known for a while in the academic world, and have seen in practice in some of those acute environments that we have studied and worked with, is that we have had it wrong around resilience. That idea of being gritty enough not to be affected isn't actually the most adaptive way of being. Sometimes the most resilient response is allowing whatever is happening around you to be absorbed, for you to be affected, to process it, so that you can grow through it. So I appreciate that.
Okay. So where we're going to head next is this, I love the simplicity of this model, A, B, C, D. And partly because Sometimes when we hear this word about the likes of resiliency, we tell people you should be more resilient,
Right.
which is like saying to a thirsty person, you should hydrate, rather than just giving them water. So
Right.
it's a practical model that, depending on where someone's at, they may find any of these 4 letters may be more important than others. But it starts with awareness.
Absolutely.
Now, the reason I want to hold here is, in of itself, awareness can feel for some like it's and I hate the description, soft or hard word. Rather, it's a human word. So when you use the word awareness, can you start by defining for us what it is, and secondly, why awareness is so important?
Along the periphery of resilience, there is a huge risk that we might not hear the message because we think some things are soft or hard or practical or not. At the end of the day, that's what it takes.
Yes.
And the resilience always has to start with awareness. So in the most practical context that I've studied this phenomenon, again, military, SAS selection, we used to say that awareness is the selection gate to success in the SAS selection process.
Awareness is the selection gate for an SAS soldier to get through.
Yeah.
Talk more about that.
Now, well, think about reference points. We are thinking top soldier, top physical fitness, top nutritional foundation, a remarkable IQ. Sure. But if they didn't have awareness, they don't pass. And it's one of those really uncomfortable realities to observe in action. Now, the reason why awareness matters so much is you can almost watch it happen physically. How or to what extent someone is self-aware enough to understand how self-doubt shows up and when it shows up, and how to have a conversation. They used to call it the gremlin on your shoulder, right? And so you have the gremlin of doubt on your shoulder. Someone who tells you that you couldn't possibly do that because back in 1985, do you remember that epic failure? You know, right? So people who have remarkable awareness are very, very good at having that discussion with the gremlin on their shoulder and going, you know what, yeah, good, thank you for protecting me. I'm just going to take one step forward.
Okay.
But awareness applies to 2 key areas that we need to be focusing on. The first one is self-awareness. Yes. Who is it that is standing here today to meet the challenge? Who is it that is facing me in the mirror? What do they need? What am I bringing to the situation that can take away from me and that I might need to hold at bay? But for that to work, we have to have situational awareness too. Not wishful thinking, not ruminating, not worrying. Awareness of the here and now.
Okay.
There's a lovely little saying that we have, which is you take on your own with firm feet on the ground, wherever the ground might be.
Yes.
Eyes, hearts, and minds wide open. And that's awareness.
Okay. So you're making the distinction here, the gremlin on my shoulder is not positive talk, positive thinking necessarily.
Right.
It's the reality of where I am, nothing worse, but nothing more. Have I understood that right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And then situational awareness, is that the environment around me? Okay.
The environment around you might include your current predicament as it shows itself, not as it compares against your dream in life, but as it is right now.
Yes.
You have to know where your starting point is in order to be able to traverse the complexity of change, ambiguity, and unpredictability.
Right.
So situational awareness also applies to who is around me. What resources may we lean into each other for in order to tackle this complexity?
Which I find interesting, Alia, because you've explained to me before that one of the key differences between an elite soldier versus others is that they can find their sense of equilibrium faster than anyone else.
Right.
So put into an environment where they are foreign soils or unfamiliar terrain or dangerous terrain, but the ability within nanoseconds to firmly know where they are so they can start taking actions where others are still calibrating.
That's right.
That's the situational awareness and the self-awareness, peace and harmony.
That's it, yeah.
Okay. So if it is so important, if indeed it is the gate for selection, Gilbert Enoka in the All Blacks talks about it's right up there with oxygen for performance. If it is so important, how do you build it? How do you train the muscle of awareness, self or situational?
Well, there aren't too many shortcuts around it. The one thing that I know is most powerful to begin with is to notice the number of times where your thoughts, feelings, emotions, reactions have a counterintuitive or counterproductive result. And so starting to examine, creating that gap between event and reaction, as Viktor Frankl would call it, right? There is so much in this. Magic, resilience, positive effect always happens in the space in between. And so it's the ability to pause for a microsecond and go, wait, where does that come from? Does that help me or that hinder me?
Yes.
How do I navigate myself through this challenge? I've loved watching this in a variety of different contexts too, because oftentimes we are all wired to focus on a pain point, on a point of potential risk or depletion. Fight, flight, freeze exists to protect us. But those who are amazing in pivoting the way away from those paralyzing moments of fear or anxiety or worry, we go, great, okay, my feet are sore right now, but my legs are strong, my arms are strong, my mind is good. Or I'm feeling quite down right now, but there is something within my fingertips that I can affect in my environment right now, even if it's something as little as my appearance for a microsecond.
Okay, that's interesting, because this gap, to your point, Frankl talking about, it's the gap between stimulus and response.
Yeah.
I love this idea that in an environment where in theory we have no control over anything, we can always find something to get control back on. And my mind goes to stories you've shared before in the selection process, where on the face of it, there's nothing anyone can control, but they've clawed back some control. Do you mind sharing some of that? Just give some practical examples of what that looks like.
One of my favorite examples actually is of an individual that we all very much wanted to pass the selection course because he was an outstanding soldier, but as always weren't sure how he'll go. And one of the odd observations that we had of him is the ability that he had to somehow present himself in control of his context, even if it is right here, that close, right? Because sleep deprivation, hunger, physical depletion have acute effect on all of us. But there's a particular stage in the ESA selection process where some of the most grueling activities have been completed just before you enter an activity called Von Temsky. And that is one of the ugliest stages of the selection course. In this instance, it had to be conducted in a swamp. So you carry this speck that is half your body weight in some instances, if not more, through a swamp for no one knows why, just to test your resilience, right? Now this individual had just completed the previous phase. They have a small break in which they have to hydrate and perhaps, I don't know, focus on the next task. And what we noticed about him is that he'd sit there polishing his boots, making sure that he looks tidy, shaving himself, making sure that he presents the best version of himself for whatever is to come next. Scooping up a little bit of self-efficacy with whatever he had within his realm of control right now. And in a debrief afterwards, him, along with all of the others that have made it through the selection course and variety of other challenges afterwards, the first thing that you're going to hear is every situation, good, bad, or otherwise, requires you to present yourself at your best with all that you've got, as much as you can scoop up. And this is precisely what he was doing. You know, so there is, you can have that influence even if you're constrained into something as little as a matchbox. It's just, do you focus on it or do you focus on what depletes you? Can you pivot slightly? Can you adjust? There is always that room, as long as there is life, right?
Stunning. And if we take that outside of a military context, I know that for an athlete, we'll work with them on the likes of gratitudes,
right.
Gratitude journals, tidying desks to make sure that their mind is clear, little signals or symbols of taking back control in an environment where otherwise we may have lost control. Okay, awareness, very important. Self-awareness, situational, and I presume within there interpersonal awareness also. Let's drop down to, if I use interpersonal awareness as to the next tenet around belonging. Now, belonging is one of those, it's almost become de jour concepts. It's very popular at the moment. And perhaps one of the gifts we've taken from being remote as a workforce for an extended period of time is we've come to realize just how important belonging and connection are. So let me start in a similar space. If you were to define what we mean by belonging, how would you describe it? And then why is it so important for performance?
The first thing that comes to mind is a quote from one of my favorite mentors, Sam, that you hear me talk about a lot. And he always used to say, belonging is to a person what gravity is to an astronaut. Without it, you drift aimlessly and off course.
Okay.
And so this was a fascinating discovery in my research with the SAS some time back now. Because, and I want to say why it was fascinating. We select, train, and prepare individuals to be able to operate, as historically has been the case, behind enemy lines for an extended period of time without resupply. And when you hear without resupply, it means without physical resupply, without emotional resupply, without support from others. So logically, you're looking for individuals who are innately and profoundly self-reliant, almost to a fault. And yet the first thing they'll say when you're asking them how did they make it through some of the most acute and demanding predicaments in their lives is that they cast their minds to the thing that they belong to, the thing that makes them feel most at home, the place where they feel accepted and when they feel trusted. And so belonging is enormous. And I agree with you, we do tend to misunderstand it. We do tend to make it superficial in some ways,
yes.
I think, particularly in organizational context. But it matters more than anything. It is the most fundamental human need to feel that we belong.
Yes. So in environments we've been in together, some organizations will say, oh, no, belonging, we've got it. It's called our mission statement. And it's guns stapled to the wall behind us.
Right.
And our values. And you talk to these organizations and say to staff members, tell us about your values. And they can remember the first three, but they say, I always forget the fourth. That is different to genuinely belonging, isn't it? And a discussion we've had, this idea of belonging being accepted for who you are and also expected to be at your best. So give us an example of a common purpose as an example that is galvanizing for a group of people to let them know they belong. Practically, what might be an example to share?
I guess it's more of a process than a specific example that I have in mind.
Right.
And it is, the first thing is, in order for people to give their best, particularly in a context within which their best might be their lives,
yes,
they ought to be able to see themselves in every nuance of the act that they're about to conduct, right? They need to be able to make home for the entire spine of beliefs. Or otherwise, 1% hesitance, 1% kind of questioning of whether this is worth my while will make an extraordinarily difficult choice point later on, will cause an acute risk for us. And so around that belonging space, the first aspect to it is that the references around what it means for us to belong to that same shared space are never ambiguous. There is never a part that is forgotten because it is what's essential for us to perform in this context.
yes,
So knowing, firstly, shared frame of reference, what it is that we are going to be doing in order to show that we have each other's back.
yeah,
But first and foremost, clarity of purpose. What it is that we are doing this for.
okay,
And so that, and so that, and so that. So the drop-down menu of the mission statement that we have needs to be so clearly understood by everyone, irrespective of their rank, experience, or the time that they have had in the organization. And that is something we do poorly in a civilian space. I can say that with a sense of confidence and sadness.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because there's that, because many organizations, many people listening today will know the North Star, if you will, for the company.
Right.
But that's a belief, as opposed to the behaviors we do frequently in service of those beliefs. Why do we have this gap? And in the civilian world, and in my daily reality, why does that gap exist between beliefs and behaviors, but in other more acute environments, not so much a gap? It's very clear on the behaviors we do frequently in service of that belief.
So why does the gap exist? I think, sorry, I just moved and created some epic noise, didn't I? Sorry.
Yeah, if we just run just a little bit from the top.
Strategic break. Didn't expect it, sorry.
No, all good.
So ask me the question again, please.
It's really interesting, isn't it, Alia? Because there's this profound difference between beliefs and behaviors. So many people listening will work in organizations or own their own organization where the North Star or the why is very clear.
Yeah.
But the expected behaviors that go along with that aren't necessarily as crystal clear. But in acute environments, like yours, like any elite high-performing team, The
Right.
gap between beliefs and behaviours is very narrow. It's just very clear what we expect. Why is there this gap?
So I want to blame systems, processes, and habitual patterns of behavior that no longer fit the mission. And the reason why I say that, as someone who spends a lot of her time with government agencies, corporate organizations, venture firms, one of the things that I notice is the why is a little wishy-washy. It isn't necessarily that clear, right? Or the so that we do that why isn't always that clear. A lot of the behaviors, expected norms, don't necessarily connect with it either. Whereas in teams that are designed to operate in ambiguity, you cannot have that fudge factor. You cannot have that loose space between the why and how we carry out that why. And so what does it take? It takes really deliberate, very unapologetic examination of what it is that our why is right now. Has our North Star shifted? And if so, how do we pivot collectively towards that? And I think we don't do that as bravely in non-military space because we feel we don't have to, but we do have to. And as we know, we have had a couple of themes, I think, in particularly organizational psychology for the last decade, and we are only now beginning to process that on the streets. The first one is I think they called it the death of the lifer, right? We used to...
Death of the lifer.
Death of the lifer.
Gotcha.
And so effectively what we're talking about here is the fact that most organizations will not retain the talent that sits in a 9-box grid talent metrics for the time that they predict that talent to remain a top talent. They will find someone or something that is a little bit more appealing, that has a little bit more bonus added to the paycheck, that has a little bit of a wider desk or a different kind of corner office, right?
Yes.
It exists on a global scale. The other thing is the dawn of the seeker, right? That constant seeking of the next opportunity to captivate me. We are at a phase and a stage now where people have had the opportunity to examine, is this for me? And why is it for me? And what are the needs that it's going to meet at a more existential level than before? And so that connection between the why and how do we achieve that why, we have to translate it a whole heap more meaningfully. And it doesn't come from the top down. It comes from all over the place.
Yeah, it's really interesting. My mind goes, there was a piece of research we saw recently where Inc. magazine asked 1,500 chief executives, how clear do you think your employees will be on your top 3 priorities?
Right.
And the chief executive said everyone would be clear on these. And they said, now how clear do you think? And the consensus amongst these 1,500 chief executives was 66%, all my people will know exactly what our priorities are. And then they asked the people in these 1,500 organizations, how clear are you? The chief executives thought it would be 66%. The people's 2% of them were clear on the top priorities. There's an alarming gap to which the chief executive said, well, how many times do I need to say it? Answer, a lot more than you are. But this idea of red threading from your North Star to your daily behaviors, you made the point that in environments where we're performing in ambiguity all the time, it's really important, but arguably we are now, because things are less, and they're less certain, more volatile than they have been in the past. So if you were working with a group that are watching today and helping them do that threading from what's very clear as the North Star to here's what you need to do on Tuesday, how would you steer them to start?
I want to step it back a little because this kind of statistic scares me. It's a lot more pessimistic than I would have expected, and it's probably true. And so you just think about what happens to all this abundant talent that is misdirected or that is pouring endless amount of energy in all the wrong directions.
Yes.
We have a saying, there is no point having the top talent of whatever world it is that you're selecting them from, forcing them to stand up and observe the same complex reality from the same set of binoculars. And a lot of these situations where we have said it, how many times have I said the why in the top 3 priorities hasn't translated?
Yes.
Is an example of just that. We have gone, okay, these are the 3 objectives, understand it how you might like, but we are going there. Meanwhile, everyone is running around trying to occupy the time with something that feels worthwhile to them.
Yes.
So if we have those objectives, the job to be done then is to say, okay, from your unique perspective, diverse talent, what do you think we might do next in order to get there?
Yes.
Is that the true North Star? Or is there some pivoting that needs to happen here on a waka? And how might we do that collectively? Now, when we're speaking of collectively, we don't mean a sweet kumbaya. We mean you have everyone on the floor to conduct themselves in the same direction with the same ferocity and commitment to the same mission, hopefully, or else we are just kidding ourselves. We are in a completely different context now. And so the question that I have is, if these objectives have been scripted somewhere, to what extent have they been sense-checked with everyone that is supposed to uphold them, with every fibre of the being during the working hours, which is almost every hour of all of our lives now?
Yes.
How do they translate that for themselves? What do they see is missing? Because those are the moments that create competitive advantage, sustainable future, capacity to not just survive but also thrive. And again, we have no options there either.
Yeah, I love what you just did then, because belonging for some people will be, we all wear the same jersey.
Right.
Or we all remember the same sound bites. But that's very different from me as an individual feeling safe, seen, celebrated, and then cherished for the unique skills that I bring to this journey.
Yes.
And if we're all bringing our unique skills to a journey, it's no longer a memory test. It's probably more a case of just how quickly and how far could we go. So I'm going to use that to move into the next letter, this idea of curiosity. Now this one for me fascinates me. I remember when we first met, my question was, what is the difference between an elite soldier or an elite performer in your mind and everyone else? And I think I presume the answer would be things like grit or strength, but the answer you gave me was curiosity. What is this word and why is it so important?
Imagine my surprise when I discovered that this was the word that appealed to absolutely every member of the team equally. And I'll start off by grounding us into how they would describe the team context. So by design, everyone in the team is diverse, truly. That's what we select for, because that's how you deal with ambiguity. But they'll always say, irrespective of how different we are from each other, we are all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And I just thought, what does that even mean? And the point there was, there is an insatiable appetite to discover what if, I wonder whether, I wonder why, I wonder how, is in fact the reason why these individuals sign up to be a part of the SAS. Part of it is, of course, service, some degree of heroism, a desire to contribute. But underpinning that is, I want to know what I'm made of. I want to know how much of myself I can utilize and how I can deal with what seems confronting and intolerable by looking around, underneath, above it, through it, and imagine possibilities that might not be available to others.
The concept of curiosity and a related innovation, if you will. Many organizations will talk about the fact to reimagine the future, about using resources that are increasingly limited, but with a more extended sense of what's possible.
Right.
How similar or different are the concepts of innovation and curiosity in your mind?
I can't imagine having innovation without curiosity. What you might be doing in the absence of curiosity in the space of innovation is just a slight pivot. That's not good enough, right? Well, in some circumstances might be all you need. But when we are thinking about curiosity, it is the backbone of innovation, and it applies to every facet of how we engage with our environment. How far do we see the possibility? What do we see is required for us to make that possibility happen?
Yes.
Including, can we find a common ground with the worst of adversaries that we have? Now, capacity to build these remarkable probabilistic connections, to build bridges, to recreate an opportunity to connect in a different way.
Yes.
That's where curiosity unlocks the potential for us.
Okay, that's interesting. And in the language you just used there, unlocking potential. So there won't be anyone listening to today's call that won't have the need for innovation or unlocking potential as a priority in their business.
Right.
So if it is so critical and it's underpinned by curiosity, what underpins curiosity? So for me as an individual, to be more open-minded,
Yeah.
what are some of the preconditions that are important? And is curiosity the same as anxiously looking for alternatives?
Right.
How are they similar or different?
Right. I mean, this is interesting because you see, one of the unsettling findings we had was discovering that, or confirming that you can't be curious and freaked out at the same time.
You can't be curious and freaked out at the same time.
No, because like, so in a state that most of us think we need to perform, busy, hurried, preoccupied, what we are kicking into is the good old fight, flight, freeze response. We've got a gorgeous little amygdala that is designed to look for triggers and threats, and that's where we go. We kind of think, okay, one step, another step, that's good. Okay, let's contain the threat. That's not where the opportunity lies, or where curiosity is, or where innovation is possible. And so one of the things that I also found quite exciting, though, is that curiosity is within the scope of absolutely every single one of us. And that idea that it belongs authentically to each of us is where the gold is. Because we want curiosity of different kind, that comes from a different starting point, that has traveled in different ways to that same place of opportunity we want to create collectively. There is a lovely set of principles coming out from that field of, it's called obliquity, right? And we use it in the military too. The most impactful way to get to the desired outcome is usually indirect. That's a fundamental rule of asymmetric warfare. But in civilian space, we constrain and obstruct curiosity. We kind of go, yep, cool, interesting question, but it's not going to work because of, right? Or yeah, maybe, but it'll fit in that box, and that'll happen in 12 months from now. And so getting out of the way of curiosity is what matters most. For that to happen, a whole heap of gorgeously uncomfortable conversation will have to begin, because everyone has to have the opportunity to translate whatever vision, mission, actions have been given to them to their own schema of understanding of life, and throw it back and go, actually, I can see a different way around that. And guess what? This is not even what we should be doing. This is where we should be going.
Okay, that's interesting. So if the journey of the model is, in order to build resiliency out, we start with the foundational elements of awareness, self-awareness, situational awareness, as an individual and as comrades. We then bake in the sense of belonging, accepted for who you are, expected to be at your best, knowing you're not trying to prove more than just wearing the same jersey and remembering the same things, like genuinely knowing the minimizing the gap between our beliefs and our behaviors. When those things are true, we move into the space of curiosity, but presumably only when those things, the scaffolding of those former two, are strong. But this idea of being comfortable being uncomfortable, or throwing it all up high enough so you give people latitude and room to play. Where have you seen this done well? Or more specifically, if people are listening saying, I buy it, I want to do it, but how should I start experimenting this afternoon? Where would you guide them?
I wouldn't guide them. I would secure the space for people to guide themselves.
Okay.
And so, and there's something to it. So here is the thing. First amongst equals is a term we use often in ESS. In fact, it's a core principle, right? There's also the one of unrelenting pursuit of excellence. And so when we have that first amongst equal heuristic or rule of thumb, what it invites is myriad of different perspectives. In fact, the goal is to create discomfort. The goal is to test, to push, to exert as much effort in kind of questioning what we define as the safe perimeters of what we are thinking, in order to go, yep, okay, now I've explored the perimeters of this, and now I know that this is the next logical step for us to take. So what might we do? We might develop a sense of confidence that if we are entrusting our vision, mission, and purpose to those that are supposed to carry it out, then maybe better things will happen with those things. And so what would happen? Ask as many questions as possible. Let them ask as many questions as possible. Create a dialogue, a co-creation foundation within which some of these pivot points become a continuous process of reaching that unrelenting pursuit of excellence stage and way of being.
Yeah, really interesting. My mind goes to a couple of teams that we've had the pleasure of being part of Spark Lab. One of the constructs was encouraging courage. So amongst a team, be that a peer team, an executive team, whatever it might be, creating the space, in your words, to allow people to do things that take them outside of their comfort zone. Again, like it's a muscle that needs to be built, isn't it? Curiosity. It's not just there when you need it. You may have to do some groundwork to doing it.
But it demands from us a whole heap more than first meets the eye. Psychological safety. The ability to know that as you explore and as you share your unique perspective, there is a commitment to nurturing that viewpoint. I think every now and then we are too busy to notice the importance of that. And I mean it in true pragmatic sense.
Yes. Let me just step off of this, because this psychological safety, your words, again, very well understood. Project Aristotle from Google did a great job at defining what we mean by it. This idea that accepted to speak my mind freely without fear of being judged. But we learned an adjacent concept, psychological freedom. And psychological freedom was explained to us of the room to play your game naturally without fear that you're about to be dropped if you get it wrong.
Right.
I presume, again, if you're trying to encourage curiosity, but you do that with a stick by saying, not like that, not like that.
Right.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because there is this tension between a pursuit of excellence and creativity and innovation. Because by definition, sometimes that means not getting it right. So in your experience, some of these highly ambiguous life and death environments, how are people encouraged to be innovative while understanding the consequences of getting things wrong?
So the first one is that everyone understands pursuit of excellence is not something that ever ends if we get it right. There's no excellence destination. It's a pursuit, and it's an unrelenting pursuit, which is forever, no matter your predicament, no matter your circumstances. But the second aspect to it is we call it resilient neutrality about failure, frustratingly so. So if we accept that everyone is aware enough to understand their standing in a situation, that they feel that they belong and are fully accepted, trust and are trusted, then that resilient neutrality about failure means that we seek to find the gold, the lessons learned from absolutely every situation, win or failure, even the most acute of failure, right? And so there's no question then that people would want to participate in the fullness of their capability and will, because they aren't hamstrung by measures of good or bad. It's, can you give it your all? And again, and again, and again. And if there's no fear of judgment, fear of criticism or scrutiny, then that unlocks possibilities.
And yet there is tension in what you've said, isn't there? Because there's very high standards without a fear of judgment. Because presumably these high standards are enshrined. You know what...
That's right.
A comment from another environment, the standard you walk by is the standard you accept. Which presumably back at the belonging phase, this idea of a small gap between our beliefs and our behaviours. When the standards for our behaviours are clear, then there is no ambiguity. When there's no ambiguity, it creates more room to be curious, to be creative, to be innovative. Have I...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I mean, there has to be that tension, right? But when we are clear on what it is that we are there to achieve, and we know that we will give it our all because we believe in it, because it aligns with our spine of beliefs, then the tension comes from within. The tension comes from wanting to be your best self every micro moment, as much as you can scoop up in that moment, right?
Yes.
And so then you know that this is the situation within which other people have your back. You fold in, you fold out. Sometimes you're on a bench, sometimes you're with a bet. And so that's the kind of the dynamic of the outstanding peak performing teams that we have.
So resiliency isn't a case of bouncing back, it's bouncing forward. It's not buffering ourselves from issues, it's replenishing and recharging ourselves to keep getting up and keep going forward. We start with the importance of awareness, self-awareness, tracking our thoughts and the meanings and the stories we're telling ourselves, the gremlins on our shoulder. We get situational awareness, which in an organisation context may well be grabbing back control of things in moments we didn't think we had control of. The cleanliness of the desk, the way the room's set up, how I tuck myself in, how I greet a customer. We move from there into belonging, this idea of accepted for who you are and expected to be at your best. Small gap between beliefs and behaviours, to allow room to be curious, to explore, to reframe our relationship with failure and the pursuit of high standards. With those things in place, we come to drive. Now, my fascination with drive is how often it's misunderstood for go harder for longer. Because we hear a lot at the moment about concepts like burnout.
Yes.
So help us define what you mean by drive and how we make sure that's not a formula for burning out.
The mechanisms that sit behind drive aren't anything like the sorts of things that we recognize typically as grit or capacity for absorption or pushing past your point of flexibility.
Interesting.
In order for drive to help sustain capacity to take on another tranche of the unknown, there's a different mechanism that has to be at play. We have often confused the idea of drive or being driven as being busied, as being preoccupied, as being the allspice across all organizational outcomes all at the same time. And I can't think of an example in history where that has shown as productive. And so when we think of drive, there are two tiny little beats, and I like how light it is. The first part is that if we get awareness, belonging, and curiosity right, drive follows.
Naturally.
Naturally.
Okay.
Because you see, you know where you stand, you know what you aim for,
Yes.
you know what drives you intrinsically, you know that you have the capacity and access to your capabilities through your vehicle for that, curiosity. And then drive is something that humans innately have within themselves, right? They wish to achieve in a particular way. But the second thing, which goes to your point, is that those that are most driven in a way that fulfills and excels the mission are unapologetic about maintaining the equilibrium. Knowing when to be what is something we hear often. Knowing where to be and what to input and what to contribute to the most, that's important. In sports psychology, they call it oscillation, right? And so you kind of go from periods of activity to periods of recovery. And what I've loved about peak performing teams, that just doesn't just happen with military context or sports. It also happens, as we know, in some of the best pockets of the corporate space. Where we recover is where lessons learned are gained, where perspective is arrived at, where capacity for connection expands. And so drive is simple if we get the foundation right. But drive becomes completely counterintuitive, where all we are doing is just pushing past that point of flexibility all the time.
Interesting. Did the...
That sign was a little bit too much. The other ones have been okay.
Okay, so we'll go back.
Yeah, if possible.
Okay.
That's so helpful because I was a little bit that.
No, you weren't. And open question, if there's anything that you want us to hit, get again, probe, if you're starting to think that over now, is we'll do this.
Yeah,
so
I think we've been getting good. It's very deep. So it's good like that. No, I think we're good with that.
So when you say very deep, just mull over, we can pull it back up by going, give us a practical example, and we can do that in any order.
Yeah, I think it might be that when we come to the edit, we'll be able to figure out where the exact things that we want to use are, rather than having to go back and do anything.
Yep.
Because I think as we've gone through, it's kind of, if there's parts there, we were talking about the organisational psychologist side of things and the 9 group there. That's almost its own unique, special little thing which applies to talent and this current situation of having a business where retaining and keeping talent is just such a. So there's been things where I think.
Yeah, I get you.
There's a lot in there. I think we're in a good spot.
Okay, superb. So
just to check, am I being too abstract and fluffy?
No, it's great.
But you could say that.
It's good.
Oh, I feel like, okay.
no, you haven't, but we will underline to grab a couple of, almost traversing back up to go, okay, so awareness, let me play this back. 2 tips, boom, boom, we'll get that, we'll bounce through. Okay, drive. So we'll go right back to me introducing it, and I think what you beautifully did in the answer is there is drive, the sense of movement, which is a natural consequence, and also the replenishment, recovery bit. And then I'm going to step into recovery to talk a little bit about that.
Cool.
I won't do the playback I just did then. So, okay, so let's go to this topic, drive, because here's my fascination with this concept. there'll be folk listening at the moment to say, I can't drive any harder.
Yeah.
Like, I'm giving it everything. And quite quickly, drive can almost be misunderstood as risking burning out. But I know in your world, they're two very different concepts. So help us understand, when you use the word drive, what do you mean by it? And what are some of the most critical ingredients in it?
You are right when you're saying a lot of the people we work along with will be quick to say, I can't drive anymore, any harder, right? We've reached the potential that most of us didn't even know we had. What we confuse often is drive with grit, with capacity to handle it. And what we have observed is that people have handled it to the point where they can't handle no more. That's why we have yet another level of increase in burnout, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation even. And these are significant critical risk factors we can't look past. Drive isn't something that we do, drive is something that we feel from within. We feel driven too. And so in order for us to feel driven, there are two things that have to happen. The first one is that those three things we've talked about, awareness, belonging, curiosity, when they are at play, drive is easy. It's the most innately accessible thing that we have because we are aligned with the purpose that we want to live by. We have access to our resources and capabilities through curiosity, and we are grounded in deep sense of belonging. Drive is a response in action, right? You notice the need, you engage with the need. You notice, decide, and you act. And that's what fuels drive. Drive is a self-perpetuating cycle, right? The more you notice an opportunity to influence, the more driven you are to keep on persevering. But there's something really critical that's missing when we're thinking of drive. And that's the idea of oscillation we tend to forget. And so when I think about peak performing individuals, peak performing teams and organizations, what we know is that they are unapologetic about maintaining equilibrium. And let me just emphasize, there is nothing fluffy about that.
Equilibrium, do you mean rest?
Yes, rest, balance, knowing what resources to go when and how, knowing who is going to hold the bet and who is going to take a seat on, on what? On something? Seat somewhere? I'm so sorry. Couldn't find it, yeah.
So this is interesting that, because it will sound to some an oxymoron, that a key part of driving is resting. Yet, in my exposure to high-performing teams, they are masters of rituals and regimes.
That's right.
Reviewing. Most organisational context is rinse and repeat. I do the same thing today as I did yesterday, but in different rooms with different people. Practically, what are some examples of great examples of rest in action? What does that look like? Is that a sleep at lunchtime, or is it something different?
It might be sleep at lunchtime for some people, and that is perfectly fine by me. But what I really want us to focus on is how inaccessible those outcomes that we are all aiming for, which is capacity to survive, thrive, creativity, that long shopping list of wishes that organizations have. You can't get anywhere near the starting point of that list unless you have that capacity to maintain equilibrium. Because what we are triggering is survival instincts. We are triggering transactional relationships, ability of individuals to give just enough because they know that they will be drained in the next crossroad. And so that ability to maintain equilibrium, knowing what to invest and when of the energy of your talent is absolutely vital, because you don't know when the next critical pivot point is going to happen. And that space that is created for reflection, for absorption, for creativity, curiosity, and exploration, this is where the magic lies. Now you're asking for practical examples. And one of the things that I love the most is seeing in action how individuals who are conditioned to know the critical importance of resilience take those rest moments, even if it is in a battlefield. So focus, refocus. Here is a simple trick that we have, right? And so you might notice yourself fully absorbed, completely stuck in a tunnel with a task in front of you. But what you would also know is that if you keep staring at the barrel, all you're going to see is that end point. The opportunity lies outside. It's out here, it's out here. Seldom does it stay in your target point long enough. And so focus, refocus is, can I step away? Can I think about things from a slightly different angle? Do I need to be involved in absolutely every nuance of this particular activity, or will perspective bring something that we know we need?
Really interesting. And presumably, therefore, the discipline of almost diarising these rest times. So John Kerwin talks about before every Zoom call and after every Zoom call, he does 6 breaths. The managing partners at IDEO, one of the world's leading design agencies, watch 2 TED Talks every lunchtime, which is their way to replenish. Right. And I presume replenish and rest are similar type concepts as vital ingredients of part of driving. Would that be right?
Whatever access you have to whatever vehicle is available to you authentically to rebuild your capabilities, that's what drive requires. I want to focus on what you just highlighted though, that finding the capacity to replenish yourself, to maintain your equilibrium, it's not a nice to have, it's a responsibility that we take. In teams that are interdependent, where capabilities are deeply reliant on each other, you cannot afford the indulgence of having someone who is 1% less there, 10% less there, or 90% elsewhere. And so you have that self-awareness to know how much you've got to give. And when you have been depleted, and when you have been depleted, to know how to step back, refuel yourself so that you're better prepared to contribute. I think we're developing a good level of awareness now. We're starting to scratch around the periphery of this in the corporate space, but we've got a long way to go before we make it a common practice.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Every time you board a Air New Zealand flight, we hear that message about put oxygen on yourself before putting it on other people.
Right.
I wonder to what degree business owners, business leaders are putting oxygen masks on themselves before they're worrying about their people. The moment we create a culture where that's not only encouraged but expected because it becomes contagious, presumably great things are possible. James, what are you seeing, hearing? Do you want us to dial up or down? Anything particularly you want us to tune while we're here? Go to the floor. Okay. Mike?
No, that's good. That's great. Thank you. Getting close towards the end now.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that rest and replenish was quite a good jump off because what we're looking to do with this talk in general is help us through up their rest and replenish and feed them and nourish them in terms of their journey. So that might be
Okay. Good wrap. Do you want us to get you'll lead it back in any order as if we've just finished awareness. So let's play this back. 2 practical examples or 1 magic tip.
Yeah, that would probably be great.
Okay, so let's consider that for each. So awareness, technique, tip.
Yeah, mind where your mind goes. And we can drop down a couple of...
Let's go there. Mind where your mind goes, be where your feet
Yeah.
are. Belonging.
Belong and make better.
So practically
what that means is that if all else fails, find an opportunity to create positive experience for those around you, or create some sort of shift in your context so that you can regain that sense of control and influence, that capacity to belong, right?
Curiosity.
I wonder whether, I wonder why. I wonder whether, I wonder how.
Okay, great. And then drive, anything in the replenishment space.
And the first thing is that knowing that stress and anxiety are addictive. They are designed to be so, to keep you on alert. Distract as often as possible. 2-point focus, right?
Great, super.
Yeah.
Okay, take that. Okay, so I'll wrap from rest and replenishment, and then we'll come back to those. We good to go?
There's 75% of practical references that we haven't included. I love chatting and playing with you so much that it always gets super exciting. You kind of go, idea.
Are we doing a specific, are you doing Alia to camera after this? Or
I'll grab a little intro, but we don't have any specific.
Okay.
It would simply just be
Cool.
a little bit of an introduction of yourself that we might use for teaser, that sort of thing to watch the whole thing.
That gives me...
good to go?
I'm going to get the black and white thing going as well.
Didn't really. The minstrel.
So healthy.
The minstrel.
Are we going at the moment?
No, not right now.
I feel like I've eaten my lipstick. Have I eaten my lipstick?
No,
Good.
no.
Thank you.
I'd say if it was all, no.
I'm becoming so much better at this.
Actually, they got us.
Good. What I love about what we just hit is the very topics of rest and replenishment and restoration and practical tools and how to do that. That's what Spark Lab's always been about. How do we move concepts from the ethereal to practical things that they can do? And this idea of replenishment, that's the ultimate ambition we're chasing at the moment. Help us realize that we're making more progress than we actually might think that we are. But to acknowledge the journey that we take, to feel strong about the way that we're doing it so we can prepare for where to next, that's exactly what today's all been about. So thank you, Alia, for the time. Now I'll trace back to go.
Yeah, if you jump back and then we'll grab you at the end just for a little bit of a
Intro.
break to camera.
Okay, so awareness. Let's land this practical tool or tip that someone listening can do to start building the muscle of either self or situational awareness tomorrow. What does that look like?
I'll do one better. I'll give you a heuristic.
Okay.
Mind where your mind goes.
Mind where your mind goes. Okay.
Mind where your mind goes. And
Okay.
I think irrespective of who we are, where we are, or what we've got in front of you, that
Yes.
discipline of noticing where our minds are can be incredibly cathartic and is absolutely critical for resilience. Most of us are wired to anticipate the worst case scenario. We are bombarded in an economy of attention with thousands of pieces of information every microsecond. Most of it isn't good news either.
Yes.
And so in order for us to prepare for resilience, to strengthen and fortify us,
Yes.
we have to have the discipline of maintaining that sacred space between ourselves and the world outside of us. And that only happens when we mind where our mind goes.
Okay.
Are we in replaying and pre-playing? Are we in ruminating and worrying? Or are we in the present right here, right now?
Okay. Great. Let me just step off that. Mind where your mind goes. I love it. Here's where my mind goes when I hear you say that. What are we thinking about?
Yes,
The past, the present, the future. What meaning are we giving it?
that's right.
And what do we do to take action about it? Mind where your mind goes. Love that as a practical heuristic.
Great.
So we'll come off that. Okay, belonging. Clearly it's important. It's like oxygen for high performers. A practical example that people watching this session can start doing to start cultivating a sense of belonging with their teams, families, organizations. What does that look like?
Again, I'll do one better and I'll give you a second heuristic.
Okay.
Belong and make better.
Okay.
Belonging is critical. It's like a well in a drought, but not all wells are made equal. The first job that we have to do is to ground ourselves into the places, times, people, phases of our lives where we have felt the most strength, where we have felt seen, when we have felt accepted and trusted. If we don't have that readily available to us, one of the most wonderful tips that I have is to find something, however small it might be, to improve the lot of someone by you, next to you, whoever that might be. Now, this is not just a nice gesture, but it refuels our sense of self-efficacy, our awareness of how we can influence ourselves and those around us. Any action, however small, can increase our acceptance that we have influence, even if it's something that is as proximate as what's within our fingertips.
Okay.
My grandmother used to say, in times of crisis, there are three things that matter, and in that order, the neighbors, the plants, and then the children. I know she was just being funny when she said it, but focus on your community, focus on those that are around you, focus on the things that sustain you, focus on those that matter to you.
Okay.
Job done.
Love that. My version of that in a practical sense that teams could do, we'll encourage team members to start a meeting with what we call recent wins, which is something, there's 8 of us around a table. What's an example of a recent win that you or we have been part of that's helped this team in the last week? Go. 60 seconds to think of as many examples as they can. We record those onto a flip chart, and when they're on a flip chart, then the question is, what did you just observe? And inevitably what we hear is, actually, we've made a lot more progress than we thought.
Right.
But we get colorblind to success when we're tired and stressed. So that's a technique to help bake belonging in so that we might connect with each other before we start correcting one another.
Stunning example.
Okay, let's go to curiosity. Okay, so curiosity, very important, comes after awareness and belonging. A practical tip to help people watching today to start cultivating the sense of curiosity.
Wonder more. And here is what it sounds like. I wonder whether, I wonder how, I wonder why. Wonder more.
Interesting, love that. In design thinking, they use a practical construct called I like, and I wonder, which is a way of, again, baking in belonging when someone shares something. I like this, I wonder what would happen if, which is a way of fueling exactly that currency of wonderment. Okay, then we'll go to drive. Okay, so drive, we've hit 2 bits. We've talked about it's the natural consequence, this idea of just forward movement, but also replenishment. So you choose a practical way to fuel either movement or replenishment. What would it be?
My sense is that we have to set our aim clearly first, and that's on thriving, not on surviving. And in order for us to thrive, that sustenance, that balance, that equilibrium, refueling is absolutely critical. We want to make it way past tomorrow, right? We want to make it to where we're dreaming we need to be. And so for that reason, I think the most important thing is to mind what matters most, find access point so that you can refuel yourself as frequently as possible in order for you to give it your all.
Yeah, I love that. So my suggestion, your diary will be the greatest sense of how much time you're dedicating to replenishment. So what might 3 interstitials, 3 ad breaks in your day look like if we're going to go after replenishment? Breathing, walking, gratitude, whatever it might be. Without it in diaries, we're just hoping it happens.
Have you seen this? The question of, have you given yourself 1% today? And it's what, 1% of a day is 14.25 seconds?
Right.
Self-reflection, of grounding. Even if it is something as little as take your shoes off, stand on the grass. My husband does that all the time. Ground yourself in your present moment where you are. Cut the white noise before you re-engage. 14.25 seconds. It sounds like a lot, but you're investing in the most meaningful vehicle you have to achieve whatever it is that you're after.
Super powerful.
Excellent. Cool. Girls, now it's just if we get to camera, thank you, Alia, and thank you to the audience for joining us. We need to look forward to seeing you soon. Hope you found it, the kind of wrap up there. And also invitations to leave feedback.
Alia, thank you for what is always a deeply stimulating conversation. We've pursued and explored a myriad of topics, but all with the same starting point, which is how do we best equip ourselves, practical tools and models to help getting a deeper sense of where we are today so we can design a better tomorrow. For all of you that have taken the time to join us for today's discussion, our sincere thanks. This series, this last 8 years with Spark Lab, was only possible because one Spark customer said, here's an idea, why don't you do something like this? And another Spark customer said, hey, that makes sense. And now we're hundreds of events into this experience. Thank you for giving us your time. As always, please leave us your feedback. If there's a topic you'd like us to explore, if there's a speaker you'd like us to reach out to, let us know. Thank you. Goodbye.
One soundbite from each of you, super quick and simple. The way there was just a foot noise or of the mic. Is that fine? So first one for you, Simon, was just okay. So curiosity, just that just had a bit of a foot noise.
Okay. Okay. Curiosity.
And once more.
Okay. Let's hit curiosity.
drive isn't something that we do. Drive is something that comes from within. Is that true? That's true. Sorry.
Oh, it's sad. Okay, do you want to get the intro again, just so that's done?
Yep. Yes, please.
I think we got, I'll do it again. I think we got all the initial welcome.
I think it was just more going back to recap and a little bit of a dive into Alia's background. I think that's what we wanted to pick up.
Okay, yeah.
It doesn't have to be as long as what it is on that page either.
Yeah.
So that's quite
I'll just riff and see where we go. The key bit I want to take is, yeah, I'll just have a go and see how we go.
I think with the defence force, but it would be
Yeah. For those of you that are joining Spark Lab for the first time today, let me first set some context of what it is that we're trying to explore and achieve with this series. Spark Lab is designed to take interesting thoughts, practical models, proven technologies. No, we'll go again. For those of you that are joining Spark Lab for the first time today, let me start by explaining what the ambition is for this series. Spark Lab seeks to take all sorts of shit, really, like big stuff, small stuff. For those of you that are joining Spark Lab for the first time today, let me start by giving you the context of the ambition of this program. At Spark Lab, we're searching the world to find the most powerful, the most practical, the most simple tips and techniques that you can use in your business to help reach the next level. Sometimes small insights, sometimes big fundamental new models. It's for that reason that we reach out to very different environments, and today is a classic example. Dr. Alia, whom you're about to meet, comes from a very different world from most of ours. But the reason that we're studying it, the reason that we're interested in it, could it be that there are playbooks for dealing with the uncertainty and the volatility that we're experiencing in our daily lives today that has been second nature for some of these environments for decades, many years before? This study takes us into the likes of surgical teams. It takes us into elite sports. And today, we're going to traverse into the world of elite soldiers, a world of high performance that for us, for many years, has been a dark art. Today, we're going to try and learn practical and applicable. Today, we're going to try and learn simple tools and techniques that have been tested elsewhere that may help us in our worlds tomorrow.
so. Got all the key points. Yep. Good. Sweet.
Sure, while we're here, nothing more?
I think the only thing might be, in her time with the New Zealand Defence Force, she headed up organisational development and the creation of the defence leadership framework.
Okay, yep.
That little bit there.
Yep.
So in her time, and then the transferring of these skills to what she does now.
Okay. Good to go, sir?
Yeah.
In Alia's time with the New Zealand Defence Force, she was responsible and played a key role in developing the organisational and leadership frameworks. The idea was, how do we cultivate a more adaptive, a more responsive form of leadership? Alia took those skills and those learnings out of the world of military into the organisational teams and community teams she serves and works with today.